My life had become a series of quiet routines, predictable and safe. I worked from home, a ghost in my own house, the clicks of my keyboard the only consistent soundtrack. The house itself, a charming but cantankerous old Victorian, was my accomplice in this isolation. It groaned and settled, its ancient wiring flickering like a tired sigh. I'd been putting off the inevitable, taping over switches that sparked and using power strips like they were architectural features. But when the lights in my study started to strobe like a forgotten nightclub, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Loneliness was one thing. Burning to the ground in my sleep was another. I found his name, Wes, on a local community board online. The reviews were glowing. Honest, reliable, does the job right the first time. There was no photo, just a name and a number for Blackwood Electrical. I called and a low, calm voice answered on the second ring. He said he could come by Thursday. The efficiency was almost startling. I spent the next 2 days tidying up, a frantic, useless effort to make my quiet, dusty life look less so. It was the most excitement I'd had in months. Thursday arrived, gray and damp. The doorbell chimed at precisely 9 in the morning. When I opened it, my first thought was that I'd made a mistake. The man on my porch didn't look like an electrician. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a magazine about rugged, aspirational living. He was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that his simple gray Henley couldn't conceal, with dark hair cut short and a few days of stubble dusting a strong jaw. He smelled faintly of sawdust and clean, cold air. But it was his eyes that held me. They were a deep, steady brown, and they met mine without a flicker of haste. "Julian?" he asked. His voice was the same one from the phone, a low-key rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "Yes, Wes." He gave a slow nod, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "That's me. Got some flickering lights for me to chase." My brain, a rusty machine when it came to social interaction, supplied a single, unhelpful label: straight. So thoroughly, unequivocally straight. It was a defense mechanism, a tidy box to put him in so my own yearning, starved heart wouldn't get any ideas. I cleared my throat and stepped back. "Right this way. The whole house is a bit of a relic, I'm afraid." He moved past me into the narrow hallway, and for a split second, his arm brushed mine. The fabric of his shirt was soft, but the muscle beneath it was solid, warm. The contact was nothing, an accident of proximity, but it sent a jolt through my system, a sudden, sharp spike of awareness. I spent the next hour following him from room to room, pointing out the offending outlets and fixtures while trying to keep a respectable distance. He didn't say much, just listened, his gaze moving over the walls and ceilings as if he could see the ancient wires sleeping within them. I offered him coffee, which he accepted with another one of those slow, considering nods. I watched him work, my pretense of being busy at my desk a thin veneer. He moved with an unhurried confidence, his actions economical and precise. He laid out his tools on a canvas drop cloth with the care of a surgeon. The house, usually so quiet, was filled with new sounds: the scrape of a ladder, the metallic click of a screwdriver, the soft thud of his boots on the old hardwood floors. I found myself cataloging the details. The way his dark hair curled slightly at his nape, the faint network of lines around his eyes when he squinted in concentration, the sheer competence of his hands, large, clean, with calluses mapping out a history of hard work. He'd push a stray strand of hair off his forehead with the back of his wrist, leaving a faint smudge of dust. I'd have to fight the urge to go and wipe it away for him. He'd occasionally ask a question without looking up. "This outlet's been dead long." Or, "Anyone messed with this junction box before you?" His voice was always calm, a steadying presence in the chaotic mess of my home's electrical system. I'd answer, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison. He made me acutely aware of my own idleness, the softness of my hands, the quiet, theoretical nature of my life compared to his tangible, physical one. My internal monologue was exhausting. He's just being polite. He's a professional. A friendly glance in my direction was dissected for hours. A shared, brief smile over a particularly stubborn screw became a monumental event I replayed in my mind. When he moved a heavy bookshelf for me to get to an outlet behind it, he put a hand on the small of my back to guide me out of the way. "Careful there," he murmured, his fingers pressing lightly against my shirt for a bare second. The warmth of it bloomed through the cotton, a phantom touch that lingered long after he'd moved away. I stood frozen for a moment, my breath caught in my throat. It was a simple, practical gesture. It meant nothing. It meant everything. By late afternoon, he was in the basement, tracing the main lines back to the breaker box. I'd brought him a glass of water, feeling like a caricature of a lonely homeowner, hovering. He was crouched in front of the ancient metal panel, his brow furrowed. "This is a mess, Julian," he said, not with judgment, but with a kind of professional sympathy. "The whole system is daisy-chained. It's a miracle you haven't had more problems. Is it fixable?" I asked, my voice small. He looked up at me then, his brown eyes catching the dim light of the single bare bulb overhead. "Everything's fixable. Just takes time." He gave me a small, reassuring smile, and my stomach did a ridiculous, teenage flip. He was just so solid, so capable. In a life that felt increasingly abstract and fragile, he was an anchor of competence. He turned back to the box, his flashlight beam dancing over the nest of wires. "I'm going to need to shut everything down for a bit. Need to isolate this circuit. Okay, just give me a second to save my work." I hurried upstairs, saved my documents, and stood by my desk, waiting. The house was humming its usual low-level electronic song. Then, silence. A profound, absolute silence, followed by a sudden, deep darkness as the power cut out. It wasn't just the lights. It was the refrigerator, the computer, the digital clocks. The entire nervous system of the house had gone dead. A few seconds later, I heard a muttered curse from the basement, followed by the heavy tread of Wes's boots on the stairs. He appeared in the doorway of my study, a silhouette against the slightly less absolute dark of the hallway window. "Well," he said, and the single word was freighted with weary frustration. "That wasn't supposed to happen." "What was that?" "I think the main breaker just gave up the ghost. It's old. Probably couldn't handle the surge when I isolated the other circuit. It's completely fried," he sighed, a sound that seemed to fill the sudden stillness. "I don't have a replacement for this model on the truck. I'll have to get one from the supply house in the morning." The implications sank in slowly. No power, no lights, no heat, as the furnace was electric. And it was getting dark outside, the late autumn afternoon already fading to a deep, bruised purple. "So we're just in the dark?" I asked, feeling foolish. "Looks that way," he said. His voice was different in the dark. Closer, more intimate without the visual distractions. I could hear the soft sound of his breathing. "I am so sorry about this, Julian. This is on me. It's not your fault. You said it was ancient." A beat of silence. "Still, I don't like leaving a job like this." We stood there for a long moment, two shapes in the encroaching gloom. The professional boundary between us had evaporated with the electricity. We were just two men in a dark, cold house. The absurdity of it was almost funny. "I have candles," I said suddenly, "and a fireplace. And I think there's a bottle of whiskey in the kitchen." I could practically feel him considering it. I saw his silhouette shift. "Candles and whiskey sound a hell of a lot better than sitting in my truck," he said, and a low chuckle followed his words. The sound was warm, unexpected. "Lead the way." Just slowly. Navigating the house in the dark was a strange ballet. I led, my hands trailing along the walls I knew by heart. He followed, his presence a warm weight behind me. We found the candles in a kitchen drawer and the whiskey in a high cabinet. My hands brushed his as I passed him a glass, the contact sending another shiver of awareness through me. We lit a half-dozen candles, their flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the familiar room seem strange and new. We settled in the living room, in front of the unlit fireplace. I built a fire with the logs from the basket, my movements clumsy in the low light. Wes watched, his face a mask of flickering gold and shadow. Once the fire caught, casting a steady, warm glow, the atmosphere shifted. The oppressive dark was replaced by a conspiratorial twilight. "So," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "you live here all alone?" The question was simple, but in the quiet intimacy of the room, it felt profound. "Yeah, just me. It's a big house for one person." "It was my grandparents'," I explained, the words coming more easily than they usually did. "I inherited it. Seemed easier to stay than to figure out where else to go." The confession of inertia hung in the air. He nodded, taking a sip of whiskey. "I get that. Sometimes the path of least resistance is the only one you can see," He looked into the fire, his profile sharp and thoughtful. I grew up in one place. Lived in the same house for 18 years. The day I left for trade school, I swore I'd never get stuck like that. Been moving around ever since. It was the first piece of his personal history he'd offered, and I held it like something precious. Do you miss it? Having one place. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the flames. Sometimes. I miss the idea of it, I guess. The feeling of knowing where everything is in the dark. He glanced at me. A quick, meaningful look. Like you do. My heart gave a small, painful throb. We were talking about houses, but we weren't. We were talking about being settled, about being lost. The whiskey and the fire were loosening something inside me, some tightly coiled knot of loneliness. What was your first place on your own like? I asked, wanting to keep him talking, wanting to fill the quiet rooms with the sound of his voice. He let out a small, huffed laugh. A basement apartment that flooded every time it rained. Had a roommate who tried to brew his own beer in the closet. The whole place smelled like damp socks and failure, he smiled. A genuine, unguarded smile that lit up his whole face. It was awful. I loved it. The smile was transformative. It cracked open his stoic facade and showed me a glimpse of the younger man, the one who was excited by a smelly apartment because it was his. I found myself smiling back, a real smile of my own. My first place was a dorm room, I said, shared with a guy who color-coded his sock drawer. I was too intimidated to even leave a book out of place. Control freak, Wes diagnosed, his eyes twinkling in the firelight. Completely. It taught me to be tidy, at least. Or it taught you to hide parts of yourself so you don't mess up someone else's system, he countered, and his voice was suddenly serious. The observation was so unexpectedly sharp, so accurate, that it stole my breath. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just a handsome tradesman, but a man who was paying attention. A man who saw things. The straight box I'd put him in was beginning to feel flimsy, inadequate. The air between us grew thick. The fire crackled, the only sound besides our breathing. I wanted to ask, to push, but I was afraid of the answer. Afraid of shattering this fragile, firelit bubble. But Wes, it turned out, was not afraid. What about firsts? He asked, his voice low and steady. He wasn't looking at me, but at his glass, turning it in his hands. First time you were really in love. The question landed in the center of the room like a stone dropped into a still pond. My entire history, a series of near misses and unspoken feelings, scrolled through my mind. The answer was tangled and complicated, but one name rose to the surface. College, I said, my voice barely a whisper. His name was Ben. He was my roommate after the control freak moved out. He was bright, like the sun. Everyone loved him. Did you tell him? Wes's question was gentle, direct. I shook my head, staring into the flames. No, I couldn't. He was my best friend. And he was, like you. I hadn't meant to say that last part. It slipped out, a raw, unintended admission. Like me how? Wes asked, and now he was looking at me, his gaze intense, pinning me in place. I can't breathe. My heart is a frantic drum against my ribs. This is it. The point of no return. He's just making conversation, the scared part of my brain insists. But his eyes are not just making conversation. You know. I mumbled, unable to meet his gaze. Just a guy? A regular guy. It was a weak, pathetic deflection. The silence stretched, thin and humming with tension. I braced myself for the awkward laugh, the polite change of subject, the beginning of the end of this strange, temporary intimacy. Instead, I heard him set his glass down on the floor with a soft click. What if I'm not a regular guy, Julian? He asked. His voice was a low murmur, a velvet rasp in the quiet room. What if the box you put me in doesn't quite fit? My head snaps up. He hasn't moved closer, but the space between us feels charged, electric. His face is half in shadow, his expression unreadable, but his eyes are fixed on mine, searching, questioning. The air is so thick I can taste it, a mix of wood smoke, whiskey, and something else, something wild and unknown. I don't know what you mean. I lie, and the lie tastes like ash in my mouth. He lets out a slow breath, a sound of patient exasperation. Yeah, you do. He leans forward slightly, just an inch, but it feels like a mile. The firelight dances across the planes of his face. You've been watching me all day. I've been watching you watch me. Mortification washes over me, hot and sickening. I was so obvious, so transparent. A lonely man staring at the handsome electrician. I start, desperate for an excuse, but he cuts me off. "It's okay," he says, and his voice is impossibly soft. "Tell me about your first kiss." The conversational whiplash is dizzying. "What? Your first real kiss? The one that mattered." He says it so calmly, as if he's asking about the weather. But it's not a casual question. It's a test. A key turning in a lock I didn't know he had. I haven't had one, I admit, the confession hanging in the air, heavy and shameful. All my 32 years, and nothing. No story to tell. Wes doesn't look surprised. He doesn't look pitiful. He just nods, a slow, considering motion. He absorbs the information, processes it. The silence that follows is different now. It's not awkward. It's waiting. He unfolds from his position on the floor. He moves with that same unhurried grace, crossing the small space between us. He stops right in front of my armchair, close enough that I can feel the heat radiating from his body. He smells of smoke and the cold night air clinging to his clothes. He crouches down in front of me, bringing our faces level. My entire body is frozen. Every nerve ending is alight. This is not happening. This is a dream induced by whiskey and loneliness. "Everyone deserves a good first story," he says, his voice a low vibration that I feel in my bones. His eyes hold mine, and there is no doubt in them, no hesitation. There is only a steady, quiet intensity that strips away all my defenses. He reaches out, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. His fingers, calloused and warm, come to rest on the side of my neck, his thumb tracing a gentle line along my jaw. The touch is revelatory. It's not accidental. It's not practical. It's a deliberate, unambiguous statement. My breath hitches. I can't move. I can't speak. I can only stare into his dark, serious eyes. He leans in, closing the final inches between us. His lips meet mine. It's not a hard kiss, or a demanding one. It's soft. It's questioning. It's the texture of his lips, slightly chapped, the faint taste of whiskey, the surprising gentleness of it. It's a discovery. He holds the kiss for a moment, a silent inquiry, and when I don't pull back, when my own frozen lips soften infinitesimally against his, something shifts. The pressure deepens. His other hand comes up to cup my face, his fingers threading into my hair at my temple. This kiss is not a story for someone else. This kiss is happening to me. It's the rewriting of my own history. It's the spark in the dark, the current finally finding its path. It is quiet and honest, and it feels more real than anything I have ever known. It feels like I've come home. When he pulls back, it's only by a few inches. Our foreheads rest together. I keep my eyes closed, trying to commit every sensation to memory. The warmth of his hands on my skin, the sound of our mingled breathing, the scent of him. "Okay," he whispers, his voice rough. I can only manage a nod, a weak, trembling movement. I open my eyes. He's watching me, his expression tender, vulnerable in a way I never would have expected. The stoic, capable electrician is gone. In his place is just Wes. The spell was broken by the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through the windows. I woke with a start, disoriented. I was still in the armchair, a thick wool blanket draped over me. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and I was alone. A cold spike of panic shot through me. He was gone. It was a dream, a whiskey-fueled hallucination born of desperation. I sat up, the blanket pooling in my lap, and listened. The house was silent, the oppressive, dead silence from before. But then I heard it, a faint clinking sound from the kitchen. I found him standing at the counter, his back to me. He had lit a few candles and was trying to figure out my old percolator. The sight was so surreal, so domestic, it made my head spin. He hadn't run. He was trying to make coffee. He must have heard me, because he turned. In the harsh morning light, the magic of the previous night felt 1,000 miles away. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't smiling. "Morning," he said, his voice flat. "Morning," I replied, my own voice a croak. An awkward, heavy silence descended. We avoided each other's eyes. I was certain he regretted it. The dark, the whiskey, my pathetic confession, it had all been a moment of temporary insanity. Now, in the light of day, he was seeing his mistake. He was the straight electrician, and I was the lonely client who had taken advantage of a weird situation. My cheeks burned with shame. "The supply house opens at 7, he said, his gaze fixed on the percolator. "I can be there and back in an hour. Should have your power up and running by mid-morning." He was all business again. The shift was jarring, painful. I just nodded, unable to form words. I watched as he rinsed out his whiskey glass from the night before and placed it carefully in the drying rack. Every movement was precise, controlled. He was rebuilding the wall between us, brick by professional brick. He left without another word. I listened to the sound of his truck starting, the engine rumbling to life, and then fading down the street. I stood alone in my cold, dark kitchen and felt a despair so profound it was physical, a heavy weight in my chest. I had been given a glimpse of something extraordinary, and now it was gone. I had ruined it. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I sat in the living room, staring at the dead fireplace, replaying the kiss, the feel of his hands, the low murmur of his voice. I tortured myself with it. When I heard his truck pull back into the driveway, my heart leaped into my throat. He came in without knocking, carrying a small cardboard box. He didn't look at me. He just walked straight down to the basement. I stayed in the living room, listening to the sounds of him working. The metallic scrape, a low curse, the definitive, solid clunk of the new breaker being seated. And then light. The lamps flickered on. The refrigerator began to hum. The digital clock on the cable box flashed 12 o'clock. The house was alive again. The magic was officially over. He came up the stairs, wiping his hands on a rag. He stood in the doorway, his tool bag slung over his shoulder. The job was done. It was time for him to go. "All set," he said. His eyes met mine for the first time that morning, but his expression was guarded, unreadable. "Everything's on a new, dedicated circuit. You shouldn't have any more issues. I'll email you the invoice." This was it. The polite, professional exit. My chance to say thank you and let him walk out of my life forever, leaving me with a ghost of a kiss and a house full of working lights. My throat felt tight. "Thank you," I managed to say. He gave a curt nod. He turned to leave. My heart plummeted. "Say something," a voice screamed inside my head. "Don't let him go." He paused at the front door, his hand on the knob. His shoulders were tense. He stood there for a long, agonizing moment, his back to me. Then, he turned around slowly. He walked back towards me, stopping just a few feet away. "Last night," he started, his voice low and strained. He swallowed, his gaze dropping to the floor before rising to meet mine again. That wasn't the dark talking, Julian. And it wasn't the whiskey. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees felt weak. He saw the look on my face, and something in his own expression softened, the tension easing from his shoulders. "I woke up this morning," he continued, taking a small step closer, "and I panicked. This is new territory for me. My whole life, I've had a plan. Trade school, work, build my business. Simple. You're not simple." "I'm not," I whispered. He shook his head, a small, wry smile touching his lips. "No, you're complicated. You live in this big, quiet house, and you look at people like you're trying to read the last page of a book first. And you made me talk about things I haven't thought about in years." He took another step. He was close now, close enough to touch. And I didn't want to mess it up. The internal test I'd been bracing for was his, not mine. He was the one afraid of the morning light, not just me. He was the one navigating new territory. The realization shifted the ground beneath my feet. He left his number, scrawled on the back of a business card. "For the invoice," he'd said, but his eyes told a different story. They were full of a hesitant hope that mirrored my own. The next 24 hours were a unique form of torture. I picked up my phone a dozen times, my thumb hovering over his name. What if I'd misread it all? What if his morning after confession was just a polite way of easing my rejection? My old habits of overthinking and self-doubt came rushing back. But then I'd remember the feel of his thumb on my jaw, the steady, searching look in his eyes. I'd remember what he said, "You're not simple." He hadn't run from the complication. He had named it, acknowledged it. He had been honest. I had to be too. I had to make a conscious choice, to step out of the passive role I'd played my whole life. Taking a deep, unsteadying breath, I texted him. My fingers trembled as I typed. "The lights are working great, but the house is too quiet again." I hit send before I could lose my nerve. The three dots indicating he was typing appeared almost immediately. My heart hammered against my ribs. I could probably fix that, his reply came. Dinner? Tonight. Yes, I typed back, my hands suddenly steady. Please. We didn't go out. He came over, bringing takeout from a local Thai place. There was an initial awkwardness as we navigated the new, undefined space between us. We weren't client and contractor anymore. We weren't two strangers stranded in the dark. We were Julian and Wes, on what was, for all intents and purposes, a first date. But as we sat at my kitchen table, the room bright and warm, the awkwardness began to melt away. We talked about everything and nothing. His failed attempt at building a deck for his sister. My struggles with the novel I was supposed to be writing. We didn't talk about the kiss, or about what this was, or where it was going. We didn't have to. The choice to be here, together, was enough. For now, it was everything. A few days later, he came by on a Saturday, not to fix anything, but just to be there. We sat on my front porch, drinking coffee in the crisp autumn air. He leaned back in his chair, his arm brushing mine, and this time, the contact wasn't a jolt. It was a quiet, comforting warmth. He told me about the different types of wood, pointing out the oak and maple trees in my yard. I told him about the history of the house, about my grandmother who used to sit on this same porch. The silence between our words was easy, comfortable. It was a silence filled not with tension, but with presence. I looked at him, at his profile outlined against the bright blue sky, and a profound sense of peace settled over me. I had spent so long living in a self-imposed twilight, observing life from a distance, afraid to touch it for fear of breaking it, or being broken. I'd believed my story was already written, a quiet tale of solitude. But Wes hadn't just fixed my wiring. He had shown me that you could trip a breaker, be plunged into darkness, and find something brighter waiting there than you ever could have imagined. He hadn't just brought the light back to my house. He was bringing it back to me. And as he turned and smiled, that slow, genuine smile that made my heart feel both safe and impossibly brave, I knew. This wasn't an ending. This was the beginning of a whole new story.